I'm Teneale.
And I'm Kelsey, and we're financial advisors from Allman Partners True Wealth, bringing you thought-provoking conversations around you, your money and your life on the Wealth Experience podcast.
Hi listeners, thank you for joining us for today's episode. Now, the financial advice profession, particularly in Australia, has had a hard time over the last few years with events like the Royal Commission and, of course, more recently, events like the First Guardian and Shield collapse, which we're going to be talking about further today. As we know, most financial advisors are doing the right thing and acting in their clients' best interest, but it only takes a few bad apples to dismantle the public trust in the profession, and without trust, you have nothing. So today, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you can identify a trusted advisor who's here to serve you and act in your best interests.
So, Teneale, I think it's really timely to touch on that point about being a trusted advisor and what does that really mean. And really what it means is that they're there to serve and to always act in your best interests, and that's really the position of them being a trusted advisor. But there's also a term used for this, and it's called being a fiduciary, which is a big word, whereby you hold a legal and ethical position of trust, where you place others' needs above your own. And this does apply to the financial advice industry, but people are most commonly aware of it with other professions such as lawyers or trustees who manage assets on behalf of other people, corporate directors, for example. So certainly in that professional space, it's a word that is used quite often, but not always actually adhered to. That's right. Yeah,
it's kind of a no-brainer because you would think that anybody in that kind of a professional space should have to be a fiduciary, but I guess as we know, that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, that's right. And I think maybe we actually, as part of these conversations, unpack that. You know, what does it really mean to be a fiduciary, and how do you actually identify that? Because as a person, walking down the street, how would they know if one person in that profession is a fiduciary or not? Okay, so maybe we think about that in a bit more detail. But if you think about some of the aspects of the fiduciary relationship to start with, you have a duty of care, duty of being loyal to that person, confidentiality, to act in good faith, and to always avoid conflict of interest.
Oh, that might be a hard one too.
Yeah, and I think the hardest one in this profession, which seems to rear its head, is that the conflict of interest. So your personal gain over others' gain. So if you're in breach of this, then really you've failed to act in someone's best interest. So when you're seeking financial advice, this is something as a client or someone that's seeking a financial advisor, you want to make sure that you absolutely avoid at all costs, and that you want to make sure that you get somebody that's going to act in the best interest of you. And it's really relevant then to talk about the recent Shield and First Guardian scandal that you mentioned earlier on, because this is really serious stuff, right?
And it's scary. I'm sure that there's lots of listeners that are sitting there going, my goodness, I'm seeing all this scary stuff on the news. So maybe you can give us some of those statistics about what actually happened.
Absolutely. And then also thinking, how do I stop this from happening to me?
Yeah.
How do I know this isn't going to happen to me 5 years down the track? But there's over 12,000 Australians that lost their retirement savings through this scandal, for lack of a better term, I guess, because they invested into the funds that ultimately collapsed, leading to $1.2 billion, big number, dollars that had effectively gone into liquidation.
Wow.
And disappeared. And the reason this happened was, I think there's lots of different reasons behind it, but the big part of it is the directors of those funds transferred the money to offshore businesses and entities connected with the directors themselves. So conflict of interest, red flag, and total fraud, actually, in these cases, as we understand it at the moment.
And for the investors that were there, Kels, you might see these things at times and think, oh my goodness, well these people just got involved in these messy investment schemes, pyramid schemes, and how did they let themselves get there? But you're actually talking about here not just investments, you're actually talking about financial advisors, right?
Absolutely. And to the next point, I guess, how do you get yourselves in this position, and what do financial advisors have to do with it, right? Because that's funds, that's the actual investments themselves. So most commonly people were able to get themselves involved in these funds because of the recommendations from their financial advisors. And these are the people that you trust to act as fiduciaries, and for them in their profession to do their due diligence on the funds that you're being invested in.
Yeah,
so
like you said, putting their needs ahead of the financial advisor's own and making sure everything's right and in the best interest.
Yeah. And that's not to say that the financial advisors that made these recommendations willingly and knowingly put them in the funds for fraudulent reasons for their own personal gain. That's not necessarily the case. But what has clearly happened there is that when these funds have been recommended, the due diligence process of how they get to that point has not been comprehensive enough. And there was actually, when I was doing a bit more research on it, there was one particular firm that spoke, I think it was to maybe Business Insider, and they'd said, well, the fact sheet said that there was 3 years of good returns and maybe, I think they said about a 3.5 star rating out of 5. And that was sufficient enough.
That was it. That was the due diligence.
Well, that's what they had cited as their due diligence, and claimed that was then sufficient enough for them to believe that that was a valid and a good fund. And, there's lots of things that we could delve into in that space, but
it's like an onion, right? The more layers that you peel back, the more that are actually available there. And really speaking, when you're talking about these things, as a consumer, I would probably expect that it's not just the outside layers that we've looked at. We've actually delved as deep as we possibly can when it comes to places to place money into.
Absolutely. So when you think about, well, how do I then identify that? Because if you're not practiced in this industry, you're not going to know what you don't know, right? So high level, there's a couple of things that you can look at in your financial advisor to, filter out certain people, certain individuals, certain firms. And then we'll delve deeper into, what are some of the big ticket items that you can really get some more detail in to know that you can trust the people that you're dealing with. So first things first is, what is your financial advisor's knowledge and qualifications?
Seems like a hygiene factor to me.
Yep, very, very standard. What qualifications do they have? I think it's always a good indication that they've got the highest standard of qualifications. So it might be that they've got CFP. So you might be looking for that designation to start with. What's their experience? How long have they been in the industry? And that experience doesn't have to be necessarily in the financial advice role. Someone might have experience of being in a technical role for many, many years and whatnot. And then in your conversation, so when you're engaging with your financial advisor, what is the transparency that you are receiving in those conversations? So when you're asking the questions around, why this fund, why this strategy, openly ask these questions. And if you're not getting the transparency that you need, then there's a red flag, right? So these are really, really high level, very basic points of where to start. But if you're seeking the highest possible standard of an advisor from a due diligence process, and then overlaying that with the confidence that that's been checked and vetted by somebody else, there's something to look for, which is called a CEFEX accreditation. And that stands for the Centre for Fiduciary Excellence. I'm glad that came out okay. There was an opportunity there for getting tongue-tied.
Big words.
So, Teneale, let's talk about fiduciary excellence in a little bit more detail,
I guess we can sort of think about it, as a bit of a quality assurance check and a certification that a high level of standards are actually met. And I love that you were talking a little bit about asking about what the qualifications of the advisor are, what the history of the advisor is. There's another part of that says advisors don't just stand on their own, and they have financial advice firms around them. They have licensees that they provide advice under as well too. So even asking that level of details for consumers about the firm that they work with and what are its processes and its track record of being able to do this over long periods of time through all types of market conditions. And then I think that leads in really well to this CEFEX accreditation that we're talking about, which is something that we do here at Allman Partners, in that it's thinking about that quality assurance of saying, I can say that I'm adhering to the highest standards and I'm doing all the things that are necessary, but who actually comes and proves that that's the case? And if you think that exists, for example, in things like food industries, you kind of expect that when you're going into a restaurant, you're going to be getting high quality foods out of clean kitchens with all the health practices. You can get that in manufacturing, et cetera, but so for financial advice, CEFEX is one of the groups that provides an accreditation, and they do that at the international level. So We actually recently had 𝐞𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿, which is one of our financial advisors and directors at Allman Partners, interview CEFEX's general manager, Carlos Panksepp, which you can find on YouTube, and it really highlights what goes into being able to achieve the CEFEX accreditation. My goodness, I hope I said his last name correctly too, because I'm pretty good at mispronunciations.
And I think there's something important in that, Teneale, in what you said, is that it's worldwide. This is a global accreditation, right? So 130 firms worldwide have this. But when you think about the scale of...
It's not a lot.
That's really not a lot of firms. And if you delve even deeper, if you're talking about the Australian landscape, there's only 7 in Australia.
Wow.
And we do have bragging rights there. Allman Partners is one of 7 in Australia that do have this accreditation. And as you can see, obviously, because there's not that many accredited, it's not mandatory.
Yeah.
It's not something you have to do, right?
Yeah, and I think there's an argument that can be said for the fact that financial advisors, post-Royal Commission, we do have a requirement to have a certain level of education. We do have a requirement to meet the �WSEA Code of Ethics, and part of that Code of Ethics is to be able to remove all conflicts of interest and act in the best interest of your clients. So we do have, I will make it very clear, we do have a legal mandated requirement to do this. But at the end of the day, it's understanding how in every step of your process are you actually showing that you're adhering to those levels, because all of these things are not black and white. There's shades of grey, and so this is really a voluntary accreditation process we're talking about, but and it is a lot about the firm's choice to go ahead and choose to go through a process, open the doors up and annually come and say, hey, we're going to show through complete transparency that we're meeting this high standard.
And I think because the accreditation isn't a once-off, and that to continue to have the accreditation against your name or against the firm, you have to keep going back. This audit process continues to happen again and again, every year, I believe. So you can be rest assured that it's not something, they had a really good year and they get the tick of approval, but it's consistent. So it's definitely a really good sign when a firm has that. But if we think about because it's kind of like an audit. CEFEX come along and they do an audit on the advisor and on the firm. So if you think about under the hood, what happens there, and why is that important? So the person that's doing the audit will come and have a look at a firm's investment policies and the due diligence then that the advisors actually have on the investments they're selecting. And what that means in simple terms is, how is that advisor showing and proving why that is best for the clients.
And it's interesting, like when you were talking about that earlier with the level of due diligence that may or may not have been done through one group or through another set of groups, is that a lot of times it can rely on the advisor's skill or perceived skill in this area of being able to select investment products that are going to be right for an individual's need. But I think what's really important is, how do you know that it's gone through the test of time? What like we were saying with the onions, what layers did they actually check into to go, I'm not just assessing this on the basis of what the returns were last year or over the last 5 years or last decade. I'm not just assessing this based on my track record of administration with this fund. I'm going to assess it on a heap of different factors that prove that financial credibility is there, that prove that transparent processes exist if things do change, that we've got flags in place for that. So yeah, you're exactly right. There's a lot more involved with it, isn't there?
Absolutely. And investments is just one part of that. And if you think about how comprehensive this audit or the accreditation is, it goes beyond that. So it looks at service agreements that you have with clients and other third parties that you work with. It looks at the client data security as well. So I think all of those factors combined are really, really important when you're thinking about, can I trust this advisor and the firm and the intentions that they have to make sure that my money and my personal information and my future is looked after. Yeah,
that's right. And even like you say, transmission of information and being secure in that process, that's hugely important, because it might be that I've been recommended investment products which are of the utmost quality and are right for my needs, but somehow in that process, if I don't have strong communication when we're electronically communicating, how can I be rest assured that there's no third parties that are coming in and making use of that, or taking off with money, or whatever the case may be? So
Absolutely. And in this day and age, that's more and more important, right?
Yeah.
So if we think back to the Shield and the First Guardian, the really unfortunate event that had happened, if you was to have a CEFEX auditor go and have a look at those investments, that probably would have been picked up fairly quickly, right? Because of the levels of information that they go into. So I think that as a client, it would give you peace of mind that there's nothing like that could happen or continue to happen in a firm that's got the accreditation, right? That's the peace of mind part.
That's exactly right. That's the hopes of anything. The more that you pay attention to it, the less likely that something untoward or something bad's going to be happening. And when it's your money and your peace of mind that is the utmost importance, you can't leave that to chance, I think, is what the clear message is, isn't it?
Yeah. And so if we can kind of summarize, I guess, why it's important for you and why it matters. First things first, peace of mind, knowing that your best interests are always put first. You can have confidence in the portfolio that's been designed, has had a lot of thought and process and rigor put through it to make sure that it's the right way to go. And an outcome of that is that it should ultimately reduce the risk of misalignment of incentives and conflict of interest and all of those areas, which is effectively poor advice. And then hopefully you should also have clear documentation to evidence all of that too. That's
something
transparent.
that you can actually go back to and have a look if you've ever got questions about, how have I ended up here, or what questions do I have around the investments or the strategies or whatnot. Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah.
And probably one thing we didn't touch upon as part of that CEFEX accreditation as well. Even if a firm continues to get the tick of approval every single year, that's not to say that the firm isn't given feedback. You can still have the CEFEX accreditation, but areas of, this is 99%. Perfect, but if you want that 1%, this is what you can do.
Feedback, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
A good firm would actually expect that you should have some areas that you could always improve on.
Absolutely, and I think that just highlights that a firm like that's looking for continuous improvement and to continue to operate in best practice is certainly a future thinking firm that's in it for the long term as well, because advice and the world and the industry evolves over time. So I think it's a really good way to keep a finger on the pulse.
Absolutely. And so for clients, for investors that are looking at going and seeking a financial advisor relationship, I think what the key message is making sure that you've had a really good conversation around what it means to the financial advisor on the other side of the table to be a fiduciary, and how are they meeting those requirements for you? What are the things that they're doing? CEFEX does have a website that you can go to, and CEFEX is CEFEX for anybody that's listening. And you can actually go on there and find an accredited firm get some information about some groups that are adhering to these external auditing processes. But opening up that conversation, having the answering those questions around what it means to be a fiduciary is definitely a great place to start, isn't it?
Yeah, wonderful. Well, we'll probably wrap it up there for our listeners, but if there's more information that you wanted to deep dive into, please make sure you listen to Nirti and Carlos in their discussions found on YouTube or on our website. If you want further information and you want to go even deeper on understanding what that CEFEX accreditation means, then please reach out. And on that note, we will wrap up and see you next time.
The opinions of the presenters are objectively ascertainable and are not intended to be financial product or personal advice.